What if I told you there's a commander that combines pirates, treasures, vehicles and theft effects and somehow makes all of those work together in one cohesive strategy? Edward Kenway. For 5 mana in Grixis Scholars we get a 5/5 human assassin pirate. And Edward's own creature types already tell you a lot about what this deck is trying to do. His first ability states that at the beginning of our end step we get to create an untapped treasure token for each tapped pirate, assassin and vehicle we control. And let me tell you, the amount of treasures that this ability can generate you is absolutely ridiculous. At first glance you might think that the idea is just attacking with a bunch of pirates and assassins every turn. And while that certainly works, that's only half of the story, because one of the most important themes in this deck are actually vehicles. As you all know, vehicles all have the crew mechanic, requiring us to tap our creatures to get them online, which means we can just tap our entire board of pirates and assassins to crew any helicopter, car, boat, airship or whatever other ridiculous vehicle we are playing, while simultaneously setting us up for a massive treasure payout at the end of the turn. And the best part, the crew mechanic doesn't even care about the exact amount of power you are using to crew a vehicle. It's totally possible to over-crew them. Even if a vehicle only has crew 1, you can still decide to stuff like 10 pirates into the vehicle like some sort of a weird floating clown car and setting you up for a crazy amount of value with Edward, making it incredibly easy to tap down our entire board of pirates without even having to risk losing them in combat. And now that we're talking about vehicles, Edward also has a second ability. Whenever any vehicle we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of their library and we get the option to play it for as long as it remains in exile. And this is honestly one of my favorite parts of the entire deck. Since we're already planning on crewing our vehicles with our pirates and just attacking anyways, Edward just gives us an additional reward for that. Sometimes he'll just hit a land, sometimes he'll hit a removal spell, a mana rock or some other small value piece, and every once in a while you look at the top card of an opponent's library just to discover you exiled their Elesh Norn, their Etali or any sort of other game-winning card. And due to the way of how this ability is worded, once those cards are exiled they will be available to cast for us forever, even whenever Edward gets removed and we aren't able to get him on the battlefield again, which means that Edward will slowly build up this additional pile of resources that our opponents can never take away from us. And due to us generating an absurd amount of treasure tokens, we will almost always be able to cast whatever we steal. Now let me just give you a small example of what a typical game with this deck looks like. Early on we will be deploying our crew of assassins and pirates, then we follow it by playing one of our vehicles. Once we have the mana we then cast Edward, then we stuff our entire crew of pirates in whatever helicopter, boat, car or whatever mode of transportation we have lying around, attack somebody with said vehicle to steal a card, and at the end of the turn we will get rewarded by a huge pirate booty in the form of treasure tokens. The longer the game goes on, the more treasures we'll generate, the more vehicles we deploy, and the more cards we get to steal from our opponents, until eventually we're just playing half of our own deck and half of theirs. And that's honestly what makes this deck so much fun to pilot, because no two games will ever look the same, because a huge portion of our resources will be coming straight from our opponent's libraries. As for this specific list, I did decide to build it on a €100 budget, making it surprisingly affordable for all of the weird shenanigans it can pull off. But if you don't care about a budget, if you head over to the Moxfield Primer, I also wrote out a full upgrade section and a fully upgraded mana base. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up into 5 categories: the pirates and assassins, vehicles, treasure synergies, protection and interaction, and the lands. And let's start with the crew of little dudes that make this deck possible, the pirates and assassins. Whether we use them to crew our vehicles, generate a bunch of treasures with Edward, or just play them for their own individual effects, these are the little guys that will allow us to generate absurd amounts of value through Edward's abilities. Spectral Sailor, a simple 1-drop pilot with a bunch of abilities that all have a great use in this deck. First up, it's an evasive pirate body thanks to his flying. And as you will see later in this section, we do play a bunch of cards that will generate us value whenever we do connect with one of our pirates, which this dude makes very easy to do. He also comes with the flash mechanic, meaning we can just keep open our mana to cast any sort of removal or counter spell, and if we don't need any of those, we can just flash him in. And by paying 4 mana, we can activate his ability and he will draw us a card, which is a very solid ability, especially later in the game, to convert the huge amount of treasures we generated into additional cards. Siren Storm Tamer, another 1 mana evasive pirate body that will make it really easy to trigger all of the synergies whenever we do deal combat damage with a pirate, while at the same time also giving us a very cost efficient pirate body that Edward will convert into a treasure token at the end of turn. And while that is already incredible, this card also comes with a really potent activated ability. By paying 1 blue mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to counter any spell that targets either ourselves as a player or any creature we control, giving us a really solid layer of protection if an opponent is trying to cast a spot removal spell at any of our value creatures or at Edward. And we can even use this effect if an opponent is going to try and mill us out by casting a huge meta magics, or whenever an opponent is swinging with their Caesar and targeting his damage trigger straight at our face. And the first assassin we are playing is Basim ibn Ishak, a 2 mana creature that whenever we cast our first historic spell in a turn will become unblockable and will allow us to draw a card. Historic spells being either artifacts, legendaries or sagas. Now considering that about 60% of the cards in this deck are either artifacts or legendary creatures, this card is an absolutely crazy draw engine, always resulting in us drawing 1 additional card during every one of our turns. And whenever this creature does deal combat damage to an opponent, he will get a +1/+1 counter, which synergizes perfectly with his first effect that will make him unblockable and does give you a nice little way to deal additional amounts of little chip damage to your opponents. Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider, a 2-drop pirate body that whenever any artifact enters a battlefield under our control will allow us to put a single +1/+1 counter onto any pirate we control. Now we aren't a dedicated pirate tribal deck by any means, but with us playing a total of 28 artifacts and generating a huge amount of treasures with Edward every single turn, it isn't all that uncommon for Captain Storm to put anywhere from 5 to 10 counters onto your pirates every single turn, just growing their power to levels that not even some of the most powerful pirates in the One Piece anime can match. Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel, a 2 mana flash flying pirate that whenever he does deal combat damage to an opponent will get a chorus counter and then allow us to loot, meaning we get to draw a card and then discard a card. Now any sort of loot effect is always really nice to have in your deck, because it allows you to sort of filter your hand, just discarding any cards you don't need at the current given board state and replacing them with new ones. And in this deck the looting is especially powerful because, as you will see later, we do play cards that will give us a reward whenever we discard something. And if you connect it with Malcolm a total of 4 times, instead of having to loot, he will now just straight up draw you a card, which in this deck won't happen all that often because you will mainly be using Malcolm to crew your vehicles, but I suppose it's a crazy strong effect, especially for some grindier games. Adewale, Breaker of Chains, a card that's both an assassin and a pirate, and whenever it enters a battlefield we get to look at the top 6 cards of our library and then pick any vehicle, pirate or assassin and put it into our hand, sort of making this card function as a cantrip that will replace itself while also giving us an additional pirate body on the battlefield. Now the best part about Adewale is his second ability. Whenever any vehicle we control deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to return Adewale from our graveyard to our hand, allowing us to just keep recurring him over and over again if he did end up in our graveyard by either being removed or discarded to any of our loot effects. And the only thing we have to do is just play the deck as normal and connect with our vehicles. Breaches, Eager Pillager, a 3 mana first strike goblin pirate that whenever any of our pirates do attack will allow us to choose up to one of his 3 abilities that hasn't been chosen yet this turn. His first ability will generate us a treasure token, just further accelerating our mana and giving us additional treasure fodder for all of the treasure synergies you will see later. His second ability allows us to pick any creature on the battlefield and until the end of turn turn that creature can block, both making it incredibly safe to go for a swing with your pirates or just making sure you can get a huge hit in with any of your vehicles. And his first ability allows us to impulse draw, just exiling the top card of our library, and we get the ability to cast it until the end of turn, giving us a solid form of pseudo card advantage. Yeah, Breaches is just an all-star card in any sort of pirate deck, especially when you are able to attack with 3 different pirates and get all 3 of his abilities at once. And we're also playing his EZ version. Breach is the Blast Maker, and this little dude comes with an ability that's just an incredible amount of fun to use. Whenever you cast your second spell in a turn, you get the option to sacrifice an artifact. When you do, you get to flip a coin. If you win the flip, you get to copy that spell, just generating you double the amount of value. And if you lose the flip, Breaches will deal damage equal to that spell converted mana cost to any target. And no matter if you win the flip or not, Breaches will always generate you some really good value. His copy ability will even work on permanent spells like creatures that will just give you an additional creature token copy of whatever you cast. And the damage you deal whenever you lose a flip, you can just target at any problematic creature on the battlefield to use this as a spot removal tool or just to chunk your opponents for a huge amount of damage. Especially in this type of deck where we are playing some really expensive vehicles, the numbers on this ability can get quite high. Fearless Swashbuckler, a card we got in the Aether Drift set that just feels like it was made for this type of deck. First up, this Haste Fish Pirate will passively give all vehicles we control haste, meaning we'll instantly be able to crew them up and swing with them on the turn they come down to get any of their powerful attack triggers and to instantly steal a card with Edward's ability. And whenever we attack with both a pirate and a vehicle in the same turn, this card's second ability will trigger, which will allow us to draw 3 cards and then discard 2 cards, which is basically a juiced up version of the standard looting effect, because it will allow us to dig 3 cards deep and even net us 1 card in the process, which is even better, especially considering we are playing a huge amount of cards that will give us value whenever we discard, just like the next one. Mary Reed and Anne Bonny, 2 pirate girls we can tap to loot, which we can use instantly on the turn they come down thanks to them having haste. And whenever we discard an island, a pirate or a vehicle card, we get to generate a tap treasure token. And this is exactly one of the discard synergies I was talking about, because whenever we now are digging really deep into our deck with all of our loot effects, just like a real pirate is digging for booty, these 2 hot pirate mummies will reward us with even more treasures to trigger all of our synergies and accelerate our mana even further. And another really awesome discard synergy that most pirate players know is Glinthorn Buccaneer, a minotaur pirate that whenever we discard a card will reward us with 1 point of table-wide damage to each of our opponents. And as you've seen with all of the looting we'll be doing in this deck, this card will provide us with an additional layer of table-wide pressure. He also comes with his own activated ability that for 2 mana will allow us to loot, but we can only use this ability whenever this creature is attacking. And let me tell you, this ability is just fantastic in the late game whenever you are sitting on a huge pile of treasures. You can just swing with him and then activate his ability like 5 to 10 times, just converting all of your treasures into looting. You will then be able to dig really deep into your deck, just fetching up whatever cards you need while at the same time dealing huge chunks of damage to all of your opponents. And this cow pirate also sets up for an incidental 2-card combo with the next card. Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator, a flying creature that whenever 1 or more pirates deal damage to an opponent, for each opponent will allow you to generate an untapped treasure token, already making it into a fantastic early game creature to just play before Edward or any of your vehicles are down, because you will just be able to swing your pirates at your opponents that don't have an established board state yet and generate you a couple of extra treasure tokens while you do so. And one of the most important things about this card is the fact that it doesn't say they have to deal combat damage, which is exactly the reason why this card is a 2-card combo with Glinthorn Buccaneer. You'll just need to have both of these creatures on the battlefield, at least 1 card in your hand, and you will need at least 2 opponents to still be in the game. You start this combo off by going to combat and attacking with your Glinthorn Buccaneer. You then activate his ability by paying 2 mana and discarding a card to draw a new one. His passive ability will then trigger, causing him to deal 1 damage to each one of your opponents. This in turn will then give you a Malcolm trigger, and it will generate you 1 treasure token for each opponent that was dealt damage this way. From this point on, you can then just keep using the treasures you generated with with Malcolm to pay for Glinthorn's activated ability, and it will result in you being able to use it over and over again to just burn at least 2 opponents out of the game and leave the last opponent at a really low life total. Now these cards aren't included in the deck to pull off the combo. Just by themselves they're already incredible value creatures for what we're trying to do in this deck, and it is just an incidental inclusion. We don't really have any way to go tutor them up anyways. But if you do happen to draw into both of these creatures and pull off the combo, it is a really nice way to win the game in style. Sawblade Skinrender, a 3 mana Menace Assassin body. She does come with a cute little built-in sacrifice ability, but we don't really have that many uses for it in the deck. The main reason why it's included is its passive ability. At the beginning of our end step, if we did sacrifice one or more permanents this turn, Sawblade Skinripper will deal that much damage to any target. And since we'll always be sitting on a huge pile of treasure tokens thanks to Edward's ability, and we will be cracking them to either cast our own huge spells or cast whatever we did exile from the top of our opponent's libraries, on average you will then be cracking like 5 treasure tokens every turn, which this creature will then translate into direct damage you can use to get any problematic creature off the board, or you can just use to chip away at your opponent's life totals. Kitesail Larcanist, another evasive pirate body with Ward 1, that whenever it enters a battlefield for each player will allow us to select up to 1 creature or artifact they control and make it lose all abilities and turn it into a treasure token for as long as we control this creature. And the value on this thing is honestly pretty nuts because it's a single card that will allow you to deal with up to 3 different permanents. You'll always have targets for this ability, be it opponent's commanders, their soul rings, whatever mana rocks they are playing, and this ability can even help you deal with a Blightsteel Colossus. If they then want to get their permanents back, they will have to deal with this creature first, which is pretty inefficient thanks to it having Ward 1, and if they do decide to use a dedicated removal spell, that's 1 fewer answer they'll have for any of the big threats we're about to drop on them. And a classic pirate card that everyone knows is Captain Lannery Storm, a creature that will generate as a treasure token whenever she attacks, and she will do so immediately on the turn she comes down thanks to her having the haste keyword, just providing us with an additional consistent stream of treasure generation. And whenever we sacrifice a treasure token, she will get a +1 power boost until the end of turn, which can get pretty ridiculous with all of the treasures we'll be generating of Edward and all of our other treasure sources. Later in the game, whenever an opponent has an empty board, or you use your breaches to disable one of their blockers, you might just be able to swing with this creature, sacrifice all of your treasures and win the game by a little 3-drop dealing like 20 combat damage. And now that we're talking about captains, we're also playing one of the most iconic pirate cards recently released, Captain Howler, a massive 5/4 shark pirate with Ward 2, that whenever we discard 1 or more cards will give target creature a +2 stat boost for every card we discarded, and whenever that creature does deal combat damage to an opponent we get to draw a card, just providing us with another way to deal even more damage and draw additional cards whenever we loot. And let's be honest, who doesn't like the art on this card? There's something about shark pirates that just makes them look incredibly cool. Hostage Taker, a 4 mana pirate body that whenever it enters a battlefield will allow us to exile either a creature or artifact until this card leaves the battlefield. Now just that ability by itself is already some really solid removal you can use to get some problematic permanents off the board. But what truly pushes this card over the top is that for as long as that card is in exile, we ourselves get the ability to cast it, making it incredibly fun to just steal small things like your opponent's soul rings or their small value creatures like a Lotto, and later in the game you can even use this on massive things like an opponent's Jin-Gitaxias or their Urza and just use them for your own benefit. And the last card in this section is Ramirez de Pietro. Why do all of these pirates come with such exotic names? When he enters a battlefield, he instantly generates us 2 untapped treasure tokens, already making him incredibly efficient by sort of refunding a part of his own cost and triggering all of our treasure synergies. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is one of those cards that do reward us whenever we are able to connect with any of our pirates. Whenever one or more of our pirates do deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to exile the top card of their library and we are able to cast it for the rest of the game, making it function in exactly the same way as Edward's second ability, but instead of applying to vehicles, this time it does apply to pirates. And as you've seen in this section, most of these pirates are really evasive due to them either having flying or menace, and it will be really easy to get an additional pool of stolen cards we will have access to. Next up, we have our vehicles. Since Edward already rewards us for just stepping our creatures, we might as well give them some ridiculous vehicles to pilot. These cards will allow us to turn our entire crew into actual threats, generate us a bunch of value whenever they attack or connect, and allow us to start stealing cards from our opponents while filling up our treasure chest in the process. And let's start with the smallest vehicle of them all, a Smuggler's Copter. It's a 2-mana flying vehicle with crew 1 that whenever it attacks will allow us to loot, allowing us to dig deeper into our deck while at the same time also triggering all of our discard synergies. And just like I mentioned in the intro of the video, even though this small vehicle only has crew 1, we will still be able to tap our entire board of pirates to overcrew it, which Edward will then translate into a huge amount of treasure generation at the end of the turn. Imposter Mech, a 2-mana vehicle that will enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, but instead it will lose all of its other creature types and will be a vehicle with crew 3. So whenever your opponents have a value creature like a Balin, a small Etali, or an active Pugferos on the board, you can just use this vehicle to get your own copy of it, which we can then use for our own benefits, and thanks to it being a vehicle, it will even help us trigger all of our vehicle synergies, making it into a really efficient 2-mana copy effect, especially since in this deck we do have such an easy time crewing up our vehicles. Cosima, God of the Voyage, an MDFC creature that we'll never be using because we will always be playing the backside of this card, the Omen Keel, a legendary vehicle that whenever any of our vehicles does deal combat damage to an opponent will allow us to exile that many cards from the top of that opponent's library, and for the rest of the game we get the ability to play any land cards exiled this way. Now first up, this thing scales incredibly well with all of the high power evasive vehicles we are playing. When you connect, you will be able to exile a huge amount of cards, and if you get lucky you might even take away some of your opponent's win conditions they're playing, while at the same time also exiling a bunch of their lands, and from that point on you won't ever miss any land drops anymore, since even if they do manage to get rid of this vehicle they will still be available to play straight from exile. And the best part is that the effect of this card will always be active, you don't even have to crew it up and turn it into a creature. Jackdaw, an actual boat from the Assassin's Creed universe, that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent will allow you to discard your entire hand and then draw 1 card for each artifact you control. Now while discarding your hand might sound like a pretty bad deal, I can guarantee you that this thing will generate you some crazy value, because by the time you got your first Eddy trigger and you have a couple of vehicles on the battlefield, you will control somewhere between 10 to 15 artifacts, just allowing you to draw an absurd amount of cards and dig really deep into your deck. As an added bonus, whenever this ability triggers, the fact that you do get to discard your hand will even trigger all of your discard synergies and generate a bunch of damage of your Glinthorn Buccaneer. And to double dip on the value, if you did draw into 15 new cards, at the end of turn you will have to discard down to hand size and you will get even more discard triggers. Mighty Servant of Luco, a massive 3-mana 6/6 trample vehicle with ward, discard a card, making it incredibly inefficient for your opponents to deal with it. And whenever you crew this weird looking robot thing with exactly 2 creatures, whenever it then does deal combat damage to an opponent this turn, you will get to draw 2 cards of it, which is incredibly easy to do considering that this thing is a massive 6 power trample body. Mindlink Mech, a very unique vehicle that whenever it gets crewed for the first time in a turn will turn into a 4/3 copy of any non-legendary creature that crewed it. And even though most of the creatures in this deck are legendaries, we do have some really good crewmates for this. You can get another copy of your Sawblade Skin Ripper, which will give you a double damage trigger at the end of your turn. You can turn it into a copy of your Glinthorn Buccaneer to just deal double the damage on discard. And as you will see later in the video, most of our win condition creatures are legendaries, and you will be able to close out the game twice as fast. The Falcon, a legendary Zeppelin vehicle we got in the Final Fantasy set, that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent gives us the ability to sacrifice it to return any creature card from our graveyard straight to the battlefield. And while we can't use this effect on any of our vehicles because in our graveyard they will just be artifacts and they won't be creatures, we can use it as a recursion tool for any of our value creatures. And whenever Edward dies, instead of making him go to the command zone, we can just make him go to our graveyard and then use the Falcon's effect to get him back onto the battlefield for free, bypassing any sort of commander decks. And whenever the Falcon does end up in our graveyard, either by sacrificing it to reanimate something or by just being destroyed, we get the ability to pay 5 mana to return it to the battlefield tapped, somewhat making it into a repeatable reanimation engine we can use over and over again, especially since we will always have the mana available thanks to all of our treasure generation. And this is also a really good card to discard to any of your loot effects because you can just use its built-in recursion ability to get it back anyways. Utro's Research Craft. Now I know, this isn't a vehicle, but just hear me out. Edward doesn't care if we tap our pirates to crew any of our boats to make them set sail or we make our pirates go into space. The stationing mechanic actually functions in a really similar way to the crew mechanic. We can tap any of our creatures to add charge counters onto this card equal to the tapped creature's power, functioning in exactly the same way that allows us to tap down our entire board and convert all of those pirates into treasures with Edward. Whenever this thing gets to 3 charge counters, whenever we now cast an artifact spell, we get to draw a card and it will get another charge counter, making this thing into an incredible card draw engine, especially with the huge amount of artifacts we are playing that will just keep advancing itself towards its final stage. That whenever this thing gets to 12 or more charge counters, will turn it into a flying creature that will have 1 power for each artifact we control. And as you can imagine, with all of our vehicles and our huge pile of treasures, this thing will sometimes be like a 20 to 30 power flying creature, making it both into one of the best card draw engines in the entire deck while also making it function as a win con that just can take an opponent out in one single hit. Horde Hauler, a 4 mana 5/5 trample vehicle that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent will generate you 1 treasure token for each artifact they control. Now baseline, this thing will always generate you like 2 to 3 treasure tokens due to your opponents controlling mana rocks. But if you are able to get a hit in against any sort of artifact player like an Ironheart deck, this thing will generate you like 10 treasure tokens, generating you some crazy value and triggering all of our synergies. And talking about crazy treasure generation and sending our pirates straight to space, the RMS Titanic, a massive 7/1 flying trample space cruise ship that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent will allow us to sacrifice it and generate a treasure token for every point of damage that it dealt, giving you access to a huge burst of mana which will just allow you to dump your entire hand on the table, while also generating us absurd amounts of value with all of the cards you will see in the treasure section. Phoenix Fleet Airship, one of my personal favorite cards in the entire deck. I mean, just look at the beautiful art and the colors on this thing. It's a 4/4 flying vehicle that at the end of your turn will check if you sacrificed a permanent. If you did, you get to generate a token copy of this vehicle. Yeah, we are a treasure deck, we will always be sacrificing at least one of those treasure tokens every single turn, making this ability really easy to trigger. And this thing can take over the game all by itself if left unchecked, because first you will get 2 copies, then 4, then 8, 16, and so on. Now even if you would have 30 copies of this thing on the battlefield, you still need the creatures to crew them. But that is where this card's second ability comes in, because for as long as you control at least 8 permanents with the name Phoenix Fleet Airship, they will be artifact creatures and you don't have to crew them anymore. Just imagine how awesome it sounds winning the game with an entire fleet of Fire Nation airships. And now that we're talking about the Fire Nation, we're also playing their biggest drill, a really aggressively statted 6/3 trample vehicle that whenever it enters a battlefield gives us the option to tap it and we get to destroy any creature with mana value 4 or less, allowing us to deal with any sort of value creature or low cost commander by just slamming our massive drill into it. And it also comes with an activated ability that for 1 generic mana will make all creatures or opponents control both lose indestructible and hexproof until the end of turn. Now while this ability is quite niche, it certainly does have its uses. Let's say for example you are playing against the Aniktea master himself, Mishkin, and he does have a privileged position on the battlefield. You can just play a political game with your opponents, agreeing that you will activate this ability and they will use their removal to deal with his board. Now let's get into some vehicle card draw options, starting with the Indomitable, a 4 mana 6/6 trample boat that has a coastal piracy effect attached to itself, meaning that whenever this is on the battlefield and any of your creatures do deal combat damage to an opponent, you will get to draw 1 card per creature that connects, which is already more than enough reason to include this card in the deck. But what really pushes it over the top is its built-in recursion ability. For as long as we control 3 or more tapped pirates or vehicles, we get the ability to cast the Indomitable straight from our graveyard. And since we'll always have the mana available to cast this thanks to our insane treasure generation, the only way your opponents can ever get rid of this thing is by actually exiling it. And fun fact, since we are able to cast it from our graveyard, this is actually an excellent vehicle to discard to any of your loot effects. The Lunar Whale, a 4 mana flying vehicle that will allow us to look at the top card of our library at any time, and whenever this creature attacks this turn we get the ability to play cards straight from the top, essentially allowing us to play with 1 additional card in our hand being the top card of our library. And an effect like this can set you up for some incredible value chains. You just have to attack with your whale. You can then for example drop a land straight from the top of your deck. If the next card is a pirate and you do have the mana to cast it, you can just play it. If the next card is then a simple mana rock, you can play that as well. And you can just keep casting from the top of your deck until you don't have any mana left anymore, or you do hit a land and you already made your land drop. And a card with exactly the same effect is the Belligerent. The only slight differences being that this time you get a bigger boat body, and whenever it attacks you also get to generate an additional treasure token. And let's be honest, a boat does fit the theme of this deck a lot better than an actual space whale vehicle. Weatherlight, a 4 mana flying vehicle that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent allows us to look at the top 5 cards of our library, then reveal a historic permanent from amongst them and put it into our hand. Now just like I mentioned when I was talking about Adewale, about 75% of the cards in this deck are actually historic permanents, giving us some really deep card selection whenever this vehicle connects and just allowing us to pick whatever card we need most at the current given board state. Damocles Base, Sword of Kang, one of the new vehicles we got in the Marvel set. It's a 5/5 flying death touch vehicle that whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent will make them face a villainous choice. Either they sacrifice one of their non-token creatures or they lose 2 life and will allow us to draw 2 cards. And this is just the perfect vehicle to swing at your opponents that only control like 1 or 2 high value creatures. Because no matter what they choose, you will always get some incredible value from this effect. They can either choose to give you a free Sign in Blood and give you some crazy card advantage, or they will just have to give up one of their high value creatures. And another vehicle from the Marvel set, and probably the most ridiculous looking vehicle in this entire deck, is the Thanos Copter. Now while this thing does look pretty silly, it's probably one of the best vehicle support cards ever printed. It's a flying haste vehicle that whenever it enters the battlefield will animate all of your vehicles, including itself, instantly allowing you to use all of your docked vehicles even whenever you don't have any creatures available if a board wipe just happened, and giving you the ability to surprise your opponents and deal a huge amount of damage out of absolutely nowhere. On top of that, this card also comes with a coastal piracy effect for all of your vehicles, meaning that whenever any of your vehicles do connect, you will get to draw a card of it. Yeah, this thing will just generate you some crazy value on the turn it comes comes down. Even if you don't have any other vehicles, you can just use this one and get at least one card out of its effect, and whenever you are able to animate your entire harbor of 5 vehicles, you will get to refill your entire hand. And the last card in this section really is a hidden gem that many people are sleeping on, not just for dedicated vehicle decks but for any sort of artifact deck. Demonic Junker, a 7 mana vehicle with affinity for artifacts, meaning that most of the time whenever you do have a couple of vehicles or treasures on the battlefield, you will be able to cast this for just 1 black mana. And whenever it enters the battlefield, for each player you get to pick up to 1 creature they control and just straight up destroy it. Yeah, you heard me right, for just 1 black mana you get to destroy 3 target creatures. I'm telling you, if you're playing any sort of artifact deck and you aren't including this card, you really are making a mistake. The efficiency is just crazy, especially in this type of deck where it even leaves behind a vehicle body we can leverage for even more value. Before we continue, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the YouTube members. These weekly deck tech videos actually do take a lot of time to put together, whether that's doing research into the cards, building and testing them, talking about them for hours straight in front of a camera in my bedroom, and the YouTube members are a huge part of what makes these videos possible. Their support gives me the opportunity to keep grinding out these high quality videos every single week, and just know that is something that I will never take for granted. So if you'd like to support the channel for yourself and get some additional perks in return, like exclusive Discord channels where I'm always sharing what projects I'm working on weeks before the videos even go live, and that awesome Panzer helmet next to your name on YouTube, you can always click on the big join button below the video. Next up, we have our treasure synergies. If you made it this far into the video, you already know we will be generating an absurd amount of treasure tokens, and we do need ways to convert those into an actual game win. Whether that's turning them into additional card advantage, powerful payoffs, or game-ending finishers, these are the cards that make sure our treasure generation doesn't go to waste. Magda, brazen outlaw, and while she's not a pirate, she certainly is the queen of treasures. She's a 2-mana dwarf that whenever she does get tapped will generate you an untapped treasure token. And this is just a really crazy acceleration tool, because you can just drop your Magda on turn 2, then follow up with any vehicle on turn 3, and every turn you can now use Magda to crew that vehicle and generate you free treasures, just accelerating our entire game plan and giving us a huge amount of resources to work with without even needing Edward. And Magda doesn't stop there, because she also comes with an activated ability that will allow us to sacrifice 5 treasures, and when we do, we get to search our library for any dragon or artifact card and put it straight onto the battlefield. Now, as you will see later in this section, there are 2 very relevant dragon targets for her effect, but most importantly, you can also use this effect to just go tutor up any vehicle you are playing in the deck, be it an Uteros research craft for card draw, a demonic junker to just decimate your opponent's boards, or even the Fire Nation airship if you do want to progress towards a win. Nadir's Nightblade, a 3-mana creature that whenever any token you control leaves the battlefield will make each opponent lose 1 life and you will gain 1 life. Now, since generating treasures is a really easy thing to do in this deck thanks to Edward, we do need ways to convert those into actual pressure or a win, and this creature just does exactly that. Trust me when I tell you, in this deck it isn't all that hard to get to like 10 or 20 treasures. You can then just play this creature, crack all of them, and you will be draining out the table for a huge amount of life. And a card with a very similar effect but twice as efficient is Mirkwood Pets, a little flying creature that will drain your opponents for 1 life whenever you either create a token or whenever you sacrifice a token. So not only will you be applying table-wide pressure whenever you are sacrificing any of your treasures, whenever you now get an Edward trigger and those treasures enter the battlefield, it will also drain all of your opponents, and you can even instantly crack all of those treasures to drain them for double the amount. Moonlit Meditation, a 3-mana enchantment we can attach to any sort of artifact or creature we control, and the first time we generate 1 or more tokens in a turn, instead we get to create that many copies of the enchanted permanent. Now, while this might sound like a really weird effect, in this deck it is actually incredibly potent, especially due to the fact that at the end of your turn, Edward sideboard will generate you an average of 5 treasure tokens. Let me just give you a couple of examples to show to you how crazy things can get with this card. You can use it on something really stupid like a Spectral Sailor, and whenever you now get an Edward trigger, you will get that many copies of the Sailor, which on a later turn you can tap and will generate you even more Sailor tokens on the next turn. You can attach it to your Sawblade Skin Ripper, and at the end of turn you will now get a damage trigger for each Skin Ripper you have on the battlefield. If you get this thing on your Mirkwood bats, your opponents are going to have a really bad time whenever you now either generate or sacrifice any treasure tokens. You can even attach it to your Phoenix Fleet airship to just kickstart the exponential growing of your Zeppelin army, or you can attach it to your Demonic Junker, and whenever you now get an Edward trigger, you will get to absolutely decimate your opponent's boards. Pretty cool card, huh? Swashbuckler Extraordinaire, a 3-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will instantly accelerate your mana by generating you a treasure token, and he gives us the ability that whenever we attack we get to sacrifice any amount of treasure tokens and give that many creatures double strike until the end of turn. Not only will this effect just allow us to deal double the amount of damage with all of our big vehicles, but whenever we do have Edward on the field and we do deal damage with a double strike vehicle, it will count as 2 instances of damage, and we will get to steal the top 2 cards of an opponent's library. Alchemist's Talent, a class card that was just made for treasure decks. Whenever we cast it for 4 mana, it will instantly generate us 2 tap treasure tokens, setting us up for a really explosive next turn, or just giving us the resources to level it up even further. By investing 2 additional mana, we get to activate its second stage that will give all our treasure tokens the ability to sacrifice them for 2 mana instead of 1, essentially doubling up on all of our mana output. And once you do have double the mana output, it will be really easy to pay the 5 mana to make this card go to its final stage. That whenever you now cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent on it, will deal damage to each opponent equal to that spell's converted mana value, which is a really crazy win condition in this deck, because you can just keep spam chaining some cheap pirates and deal little bits of damage to the entire table. You can start dropping big vehicles which will take huge chunks out of your opponent's life totals, and if you do manage to dump like 30 mana into an X spell, you will just win the game on the spot with this card. Goldspan Dragon, a 5 mana flying haste creature that you can tutor up straight from your library to the battlefield by using Magda's ability. And just like the second stage of the previous card, this dragon will double up on all of the mana that your treasures produce, while at the same time also functioning as a treasure generator, because he will generate you 1 every time he attacks, and thanks to his haste he will start doing so from the moment he enters the battlefield. And another target we can tutor up with our Magda is a Shimmer Dragon, which is a massive flying body that will have hexproof for as long as we control 4 or more artifacts, which in this deck will always be the case. And where the real money's at is this card's last ability that will allow you to tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to just draw you a card. Yeah, if you drop this dude on your board filled with treasure tokens and vehicles, you can just start tapping all of them down, you don't even have to sacrifice them, and you can start refilling your entire hand. And your opponents are going to have a really bad time getting this crazy draw engine off the battlefield, because they won't ever be able to target it. Cyberdrive Awakener, a 6 mana flying artifact creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will animate all your non-creature artifacts into 4/4 creatures, instantly animating all of your vehicles, while at the same time also turning your massive amount of treasure tokens into 4 power creatures. Just imagine you dropping this dude with you having like 15 treasures on the battlefield, which doing quick math will result in a total of 60 power, which thanks to this card's passive ability will all even get evasion, because it will give all artifact creatures you control flying, making this into one of the most surprising win cons in the entire deck, especially if you can tutor it up with Magda on instant speed. Marionette Master, a 6 mana creature with the Fabricate 3 mechanic, meaning that whenever it enters a battlefield you get the option to either generate you 3 1/1 servo tokens or make it enter with 3 +1/+1 counters. Now in this deck we will always be going for the counters, and that's due to this card's second ability, that whenever any artifact is put into your graveyard will make target opponent lose life equal to this creature's power. This card basically turns all of your treasure tokens into ammo for a Gatling gun that will deal 4 damage each whenever you sacrifice them, setting you up for some crazy scenarios that will just allow you to snipe a specific opponent out of the game. And due to the fact that you can sacrifice treasure tokens on instant speed, if an opponent is going for a game-winning combo, you can just respond by sacking all your treasures and taking them out. And the last card in this section is Outrageous Robbery. For 2 black mana plus X, you get to exile the top X cards of target player's library, and you get the option to play any of those cards for the rest of the game, making it into a juiced up version of Edward's last ability and making it into the perfect mana sink during the late game. You can just crack all of your treasures and invest like 10 to 15 mana into this spell, and you will get access to a huge pool of additional cards you will always be able to cast. A perfect fit for the Theft team of this deck. And of course, we're also playing some regular mana rocks in this deck, being a Soul Ring, an Arcane Signet, 3 of the Guild Signets, and a Talisman of Creativity. And while these aren't the fanciest cards, they do give us an incredible amount of consistency, allowing us to get our value engines and Edward out a couple of turns earlier, while at the same time also providing us with additional synergies for all of our artifact cards like a Cyberdrive Awakener, an Uteros Research Craft, and even providing us with additional affinity for cards like a Demonic Junker. Next up, we have our protection and interaction. While this deck is primarily focused on just doing its own thing and getting a huge amount of pirates, vehicles, and stealing cards, we still do need ways to protect whatever we are doing and disrupt whatever our opponents are doing. Stubborn Denial. For 1 mana, we get to counter any non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1 generic mana. Now, while this effect obviously is really horrible, it also comes with a ferocious mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it and we do control a creature with power 4 or greater, it will just straight up counter target non-creature spell, making it function as a way more efficient negate. The main reason I decided to go with this card is that the primary target in this deck that your opponents will be trying to remove will be Edward, and since he does have 5 power, this is just one of the most efficient ways to protect him. Lightning Greaves, a classic 2 mana equipment we can equip for 0 mana that will give the equipped creature both Shroud and Haste, making these into the perfect pair of boots for our Edward or any of our other value creatures, while also functioning as a haste enabler we can equip to any of our vehicles to make sure they can swing on the turn we play them. It's pretty weird to think that we can equip a pair of boots to our Thanos helicopter. Magic really is getting pretty weird nowadays. Memory Lapse, a 2 mana counter spell that instead of making the countered spell go to a graveyard will put it on the top of its owner's library. And while this might seem like a pretty bad card, especially if you do compare it to a classic counter spell, it does have a really cool use in this deck, because let's say an opponent is playing a big creature like an Elesh Norn, you can then just Memory Lapse it back on top of their deck, and on your next turn you can just swing a vehicle at them, steal the Elesh Norn, and then cast it for yourself on a later turn, sort of allowing you to control whatever card is on top of an opponent's library and always guaranteeing that you get a big hit with Edward's Steel trigger. Withering Torment. For 3 mana on instant speed, you get to destroy either target creature or enchantment. And believe it or not, in Grixis colors we don't really have that many ways to deal with enchantments. Most of those options are locked in both white and green colors. Nothing is as annoying as an opponent having a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tide on the battlefield and no one at the table being able to deal with it. Cut and Ribbons. For 2 mana on sorcery speed, we can cast a red part of this card and it will deal 4 damage to target creature, making it function as a really solid removal spell. And once this card is in our graveyard, we can cast a Ribbons part straight from there by using the Aftermath mechanic, which for 2 black mana plus X will make each opponent lose X life, making it into the perfect spell to just dump all of your treasure mana into and drain out your opponents for a huge amount and just win the game, making it really versatile by either allowing you to use it as a removal spell first and also a really good target to discard with any of your loot effects because you will just be able to cast it from your graveyard. Lethal Scheme, a 4 mana instant speed spell you can use to remove any creature or planeswalker on the battlefield. Now, while paying 4 mana for this effect isn't really all that efficient, it does come with the Convoke mechanic, meaning that we will be able to tap creatures to help pay for the cost of this spell, and we will usually be able to cast it for anywhere between 0 and 1 mana, making it a lot more efficient. And as a bonus, every creature that we use to convoke this spell out will also connive, meaning we get to draw a card and then discard a card board, allowing us to dig deeper into our deck and also triggering all of our discard synergies. Blasphemous Act, hands down the most efficient board wipe ever printed. It's a 9 mana spell that will deal 13 damage to each creature on the battlefield, but its cost will be reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature that is on the battlefield. Now the only time you ever need a board wipe is whenever you are overwhelmed and there are a ton of creatures on the battlefield, meaning you'll always be able to cast this for just 1 red mana whenever you do need it most, making it incredibly efficient. And even though this spell will also wipe all of our own creatures, just keep in mind that you don't have to animate your vehicles and they will remain on the battlefield, so you won't have to start rebuilding your board from scratch. And the last and the most exciting card in this entire section is a Heartless Conscription, which is a massive 8 mana spell that will exile all creatures. I really wanted to play 2 dedicated board wipes in this deck, and this is just the perfect fit, because getting to 8 mana isn't all that hard to do with all of our treasure generation, due to the fact that this effect will exile makes it really good against any sort of indestructible creature or recursion heavy deck. And the best part is that every creature that got exiled this way will, just like Edward, be available to cast for us until the end of the game. So you will just take all creatures on the board, including your own pirates, and add them to a separate card pool you will have access to forever, basically setting your opponents back into the Stone Age with barely any resources left, while you yourself just gained access to a huge amount of available creatures to cast to refill the board with. And finally, let's take a look at our mana base. Since this deck is built on a €100 budget, things are pretty straightforward. If you are looking for a fully upgraded mana base for this deck, I did include that over in the Moxfield primer. Let's start by taking a look at all of our utility lands. Archway of Innovation. For 1 blue mana and tapping this land, the next spell we cast will get the Improvise mechanic, allowing us to tap all of our vehicles and treasure tokens to help pay for any of the big spells we're about to cast, or dump a huge amount of mana into any of our X spells without even having to sacrifice any of our treasure tokens. Bojuka Boch, a land that whenever it enters a battlefield will allow you to exile target opponent's graveyard. And you really should be including this little land in any sort of black deck you are building. While its effect might seem pretty simple, it really does have the potential to win you games. You can use this against a Necrobloom player who is about to juggle lands in and out of their graveyard. You can use this against any sort of Spellslinger deck that's about to cast a Past in Flames and recast all the cantrips in their grave. And if you use this on a Reanimation player that just entombed one of their big game-winning threats, they are going to have a really bad time. Mount Doom. A legendary land that is just the perfect fit for this deck, because by paying 7 mana, sacrificing this land and another legendary artifact you control, you get to pick up to 2 creatures on the board and then destroy the rest. Now while this land is usually pretty hard to use because it does require you to have a legendary artifact, in this type of deck where we are running this many legendary vehicles, it is incredibly easy to activate, just giving you access to another board wipe on something as simple as a land, while even allowing 2 of your most important creatures on the board to survive the wipe. Oscorp Industries. Now baseline, this is a land that will enter the battlefield tapped and tap for 1 of any of our colors, which in a budget deck is already a really solid inclusion. But this card also comes with the Mayhem mechanic, meaning that if we did discard it this turn, we get to play it straight from our graveyard, making it into the perfect target to discard to any of our loot effects and still be able to play it. Secluded Starforge. For 2 mana, tapping this land and tapping any amount of artifacts we control, we can give target creature a stat boost equal to the amount of artifacts we just tapped, which is an effect that especially later in the game with all of the evasive pirates we are playing can serve as an excellent win condition. You just need your Spectral Sailor on the battlefield, tap this land and 15 of your treasure tokens, and you will be able to get a huge amount of damage in and take an opponent out of the game with this effect. Treasure Vault, an artifact land that for double X and sacrificing it will generate us that that many treasure tokens. Now, while obviously we don't really need any additional treasure generation in this deck, this card does scale incredibly well with all of our aristocrat effects. Because let's say you have either an Adir's Nightblade, a Mirkwood Bats, or a Marionette Master on the battlefield. You can then just step all of the treasures you have and invest it into your treasure vault, which will already give you a bunch of sacrifice triggers and drain out the table. Treasure vault will then generate you a new batch of treasure tokens, which you can then also sacrifice and get even more triggers out of all of our aristocrat creatures. And for the regular mana producing lands, we're playing 3 Scry lands, 3 Cycle lands, 3 Check lands, 3 Tango lands, 3 Pain lands, a River of Tears, a Horizon land, an Exotic Orchard, a Command Tower, a 3-color tap land, a Spire of Industry, and a Seething Landscape. And that's it for my in-depth Edward Kenway budget deck tech. And I have to admit, when I first saw this commander, I wasn't entirely sure how treasures, pirates, vehicles, and theft effects could all be included in a single functional deck. But after putting some games in, I can confidently say this is one of the most fun to pilot decks I've ever built. The sheer amount of value that Edward is able to generate all by himself is just completely absurd. And due to us playing these theft effects, no 2 games will ever look the same. You'll constantly have to adapt your game plan depending on whatever cards you hit off the top with Edward's ability. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, let me know by dropping a boat and a pirate flag emoji in the comments below. And while you're there, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss next week's video. Anyways, thanks for watching, enjoy stealing your opponent's cards, spending their resources, and sailing away with the loot, and I will see you in the next one.